In a world where financial races and business competition are becoming increasingly fierce, a surprising truth exists. Those who lose are not because of lack of skills or abilities, but because they do not understand the hidden rules of business, things that no one tells them and are not taught in books or schools. Successful people in business all grasp these principles, but most of us beginners are left behind because we do not fully understand the hidden rules of the game. The story of James, an ordinary Englishman, can be a typical example. James started his business from a small coffee shop in the center of London. He worked very hard, worked late at night, tried his best to bring in profits. However, after a few months, the revenue of the shop not only did not increase, but also tended to decrease. James did not understand why, although he provided quality products and good service. It was only when James met a friend, an experienced investor, that he realized that he was not lacking in skills or diligence, but simply because he did not understand the unspoken rules of the market. He did not know how to build relationships with strategic partners, did not grasp rapidly changing consumer trends, and most importantly, did not know how to protect his interest against challenges from stronger competitors. The unspoken rules of the market are not things written in contracts or textbooks. They are not taught in university courses or skills training programs. However, these are important principles that anyone who wants to succeed in the business environment must master, especially the unwritten rules, but they govern the entire operation of all relationships, determine your interests, and ultimately your results. Why not understanding the unspoken rules will make you fail? Everyone thinks that if you just work hard, just produce a good product, you will succeed. But the reality is not that simple. James did all of those things, hard work, innovation, and constant learning. But because he did not understand the hidden rules of the London coffee industry, he made inevitable mistakes. This is why James's story is so typical. He did not lose because he was not good, but because he did not understand the principles his competitors, partners, and even customers had mastered. On the contrary, successful people, like James' investor friend, are those who know how to read the situation, understand the game, and know how to apply the hidden rules to act at the right time, create an advantage, and maintain their position in the game. People like James tasted failure because they lacked knowledge that no one taught them, things that, if they had known, would have completely changed their results. In fact, there is no book that teaches you about these unspoken rules. These principles are not taught in any classroom. But understanding the unspoken rules is a prerequisite for you to enter the business world and not become a victim of the game. Those who lose are not because of lack of knowledge or skills, but because they do not know the rules. So what are the unspoken rules? And why are they so important in the business world? We will find out in the following sections of this article. 2. The marketplace is a battlefield. The marketplace is not a place filled with fair and transparent competition, as many people think. On the contrary, it is like a battlefield without smoke and fire, where interest and power determine the outcome. The struggles here do not take place with weapons, but with strategies, thinking, and sometimes unspoken rules that govern the entire game. To succeed in the marketplace, you not only need to be good at your profession or have good skills, but most importantly, you must understand and apply the unwritten rules, the unwritten principles that all players in this game must follow. The story of James, a marketing director at a technology company in London, is a typical example of the lack of understanding of the unwritten rules in the marketplace. James is known as a talented person, has a lot of experience, and has achieved certain successes in his marketing career. He was invited by a major investor to collaborate on developing a marketing strategy for a new product. This investor had many connections and strong finances, and James felt very proud to be chosen to be the head of the marketing strategy for the project. He thought this was a great opportunity for growth, and was confident that with his abilities, he would help the company achieve outstanding success. However, as the project began to progress, James quickly realized that things were not as simple as he thought. Although he worked hard, planned a detailed strategy, and executed as agreed, the results were not as expected. The investor began to interfere in important decisions, change strategies without consulting James, and in the end, the company did not achieve the expected goals. James felt abandoned and deceived by the investor's actions. He wondered why the things he did well were not recognized, and why things had fallen into such a deadlock. After some investigation, James realized that he had failed not because of his inability or lack of diligence, but because he did not understand the unspoken rules of business. The investor had cleverly led James into a game that James never really understood. Every decision was unfair, and what he thought was a sincere cooperation was just a way for the investor to take advantage of James' strengths without having to share control or benefits. James was fooled, not because he was not good, but because he did not understand the unspoken rules that others had known for a long time. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people in business is not in skills or professional abilities. James' story shows that successful people are not necessarily better than you, but they have one thing that you do not have. They understand the unspoken rules. Business is like a game of chess, and as in all games, the winner is the one who understands the rules and knows how to read the board. Successful people are not necessarily the smartest or most talented, but those who can read the signals, understand hidden opportunities, and know when to retreat and when to attack. James, despite being a talented marketing director, ultimately lost opportunities because he did not understand the power, position, and hidden strategies that others were applying. He did not lose because of a lack of skills, but because he did not understand the hidden rules of the market. The lesson from James' story is, to succeed in business, you not only need skills and talent, but you also need to learn to recognize and apply the hidden rules of the market. If you do not understand the rules, you will not be able to read the situation, cannot plan strategically, and can easily be led into the traps that others have set. Ultimately, success in business comes not just from ability, but also from understanding the unwritten rules. The unwritten rules that every player in the game must follow. If you want to succeed in business, understand the unwritten rules, and then you will no longer be passive, but proactive in every move. 3. The unspoken laws of business. The unspoken law number 1, chess and unspoken power. The business world is not a place where people compete fairly and equally. It is like an underground battlefield where power and capital play a decisive role in victory. One of the basic principles in the business world is the inequality of capital and relationships, something that not everyone realizes, especially those who are new to the industry. They think that they can succeed with just good ability and skills. But in fact, winning in the business world also depends on a factor that few people understand: unspoken power. The story of Oliver, a startup founder in London, is a typical example of how unspoken power in the business world can dominate strongly. Oliver, a young and enthusiastic founder, is determined to build a technology company that provides business management software for small and medium-sized companies. He had a solid background in technology, and the founding team was also talented. After a few months of development, Oliver and his team had built a great product, and everything seemed very promising. However, when they looked for investors to scale and develop the market, they encountered difficulties that they did not foresee. Although Oliver's product received a lot of praise from experts in the industry, they could not find any investors willing to invest in the company. They received many rejections, with the reason being a lack of relationships and the potential for rapid expansion. Although they had a potential and promising product, they could not convince large investors with deep relationships and strong capital. After a period of research, Oliver realized that the business world did not work the way he thought. He realized that the hidden power in the business world was not only about ability, but also about position and relationships. The investors Oliver approached all had deep industry connections and large capital to gain an upper hand in any negotiation. Therefore, although Oliver's product was very good, they could not compete with investors who had implicit power in making decisions. This example illustrates a very clear point. Power and capital play a decisive role in the business world. You can be very talented and have a great product, but if you do not have enough capital and connections, it will be very difficult for you to achieve success. Those with deep connections in the industry will always have an advantage in attracting investment capital, connecting with partners, and implementing strategic decisions. Not everyone realizes this truth when they first start a business. Oliver thought that his company would be successful only because of the product and the creative team. However, he did not realize that big investors often have strategic relationships that help them lead the market, which can determine the survival of a business. In today's competitive market, those with strong capital and deep relationships can shape the game, control the investment process, and even manipulate the market without having to show clear power. Oliver realized this when he tried to seek financial support without the right connections. That's when he understood that, in the business world, hidden power plays a bigger role than any good skills or products. The lesson from Oliver's story is, the market is not fair, and no one wins just because of ability or excellent products. The game in the business world is always built by those with power and strong capital. If you do not have the necessary position, you will always be the one who is dependent on the decisions of others. Invisible power is a deciding factor in who leads a market, who holds the power, and who will lose. Conclusion: inequality in the marketplace is not something you can easily change. However, if you understand hidden power, you can find ways to deal with it and use it to create opportunities for yourself. Learn how to build relationships, increase capital, and understand the game so you're not passive and can always lead the game. Unwritten law number 2, the strong never speak. In business, one of the most important principles that few people realize is the strong never speak. They do not need to show their power clearly. They do not need to make a fuss or argue, but act silently and only act at the right time. Silence is a powerful strategy that people who understand the unwritten law use to maintain their advantage and control the game. The story of James, an investor in London, is a clear example of this unwritten law. James is a famous investor in the real estate industry. He owns a large number of rental buildings and has built a solid reputation in the industry. However, at one time, he started participating in a joint project with another investor, Tom, who was known for his hot-tempered personality and always wanted to show his power. The project was a new real estate development area where James invested a large sum of money. Although James had extensive experience and a team of experts, he decided not to interfere too much in the decision-making process of the project. Meanwhile, Tom, who always wanted to assert himself, kept coming up with ideas and changing strategies in the project without consulting other investors, causing the processes to become chaotic. Tom began to push for a rapid expansion strategy and decided to reduce rental prices to attract customers without basing on actual market analysis. This action increased competition with competitors in the industry and eventually led to their buildings being empty without tenants. While Tom always made hasty decisions and constantly changed strategies, James continued to keep a silent attitude, not reacting and just observing. He did not try to argue or prove his point. James understood that in business, silence is a powerful strategy because that is when he can observe every move, analyze the actions of his competitors, and only act when necessary. He knew that when everyone's eyes were on Tom, he would find an opportunity to control the situation. Finally, after a year, Tom realized that his project was failing. The tenants were not enough to maintain the revenue, and the project was in financial crisis. That's when James decided to step in, but not to criticize or show off his power. He began to buy back the project's real estate at a price much lower than its actual value, and then began to systematically manage them, increasing the rental price and optimizing the profit. After a short time, James revived the project, and his profit increased significantly. On the contrary, Tom could not save the situation, and eventually he lost all control of the project. James's story illustrates an important principle in business. The strong never speak. When you have real power, you don't need to show it. You don't need to argue or make a fuss. Silence not only helps you maintain your advantage, but also helps you observe, predict your opponent's moves, and act at the right time. In business, James does not show any haste, does not try to be the leader or the decision maker. Instead, he chooses to observe, understand the situation, and act at the right time. This is the wisdom in using hidden power. People like James understand that in a game, silence is a strategy to not lose the advantage, and at the same time maintain initiative in all situations. The lesson from James's story is, the strong do not need to speak up to prove themselves strong. In a long war, victory does not come from making noise, but from patience and timely management. When you have enough power and advantage, you will realize that in the business world, silence is the greatest power that you can use to maintain your position. Conclusion: to be successful in the business world, you not only need skills and market knowledge, but also need to know how to observe and act at the right time. Learn to be a silent person so that when the opportunity comes, you can act accurately and effectively. Unwritten law number 3, relationships and the changing hearts of people. In business, relationships and trust can change at any time, especially when interests become the dominant factor. Trust is not the only factor that determines the sustainability of a business relationship. Interests change everything. And when interests change, your closest friends and the people you trust the most can turn their backs on you without warning. This is one of those things that people rarely talk about, but it is an indispensable part of the unwritten law of business. The story of Andrew, a young entrepreneur in London, is a clear demonstration of how trust and relationships can change when interests change. Andrew, a founder of a technology startup in London, built his company from a small idea. He partnered with James, a close friend from university, who was also the co-founder and CFO of the company. Together, they set up a company with the goal of bringing breakthrough technology solutions to the healthcare industry. In the early days, Andrew and James shared the same vision and passion for the company, working tirelessly to develop the product. James was a close friend, and Andrew always believed in James's ability and loyalty. However, as their company began to achieve certain success, things began to change. Andrew encountered a large investment opportunity from a reputable venture capital fund. The fund committed to invest a large amount of money in their company, and at the same time required the company to scale quickly to achieve a larger goal. This was an opportunity that could not be passed up, and Andrew decided to accept the offer from the investment fund. However, James disagreed with this decision. He felt that rapid expansion would lose the core value of the company and did not agree with Andrew's strategy. Conflicts began to arise between the two close friends, and James eventually decided to leave the company, sell his shares, and move on to another project. Andrew felt confused and disappointed. James was not only a longtime friend, but also a co-founder and strategic partner of the company. But eventually, Andrew realized that in business, interests matter. James changed his mind when his personal interests no longer aligned with the strategy Andrew had chosen. James is not a bad person, and Andrew understood that his decision to withdraw was due to a change in their interests, not because of bad intentions. When interests no longer align, a close relationship can falter. James did not leave the company because he hated Andrew or because they were no longer friends, but because his interests had changed. James decided to pursue another opportunity that he believed would bring him greater benefits in the long run. For Andrew, this was a valuable lesson in how interests never stand still in business. When interests change, everything else, including relationships, can change. The lesson from Andrew's story is, in business, relationships and trust can change when interests change. You can have close friends who have been with you for a long time, but when their interests no longer align with your plans, they can leave you without warning. This is not because they want to harm you, but because their interests have changed, and that is something that is very difficult to avoid in business. Interests in business can change at any time, and when they change, everything else can change. Conclusion: trust and relationships in business are not always solid. To maintain sustainable relationships, you need to understand that interests are the most important factor. While you may trust others and may hope for friendship, when interests change, those relationships may not be the same. Relationships cannot survive without principles and mutual interests. Be sober and understand that in the business world, interests are the deciding factor in the existence of relationships. Unwritten law number 4. The backyard decides the stage. In the business world, the backyard is not a concept that is easy to see or understand, but it plays a decisive role in shaping the success or failure of a business. The backyard here is not a physical space, but the hidden relationships, the hidden influences behind the curtain that only insiders can see clearly. The backyard is not only where big negotiations are decided, but also where big decisions are made that no one can predict. The story of Peter, a founder of a consulting firm in London, is a clear proof of this truth. Peter is a young, enthusiastic, and visionary founder. He started his consulting firm in 2015 with the idea of providing strategic consulting services to small and medium-sized enterprises. Peter was very confident in his abilities, as he had a lot of experience in the industry, and his company was growing rapidly. However, after 3 years of operation, Peter began to notice that although his company had achieved some success, there was always a lot of competition from larger and more well-connected competitors. Peter could not understand why those competitors always had bigger opportunities, despite his company having more innovative and effective solutions. One day, Peter happened to attend an industry event where he met David, a famous investor in the field of strategy consulting. After a few conversations, David proposed a cooperation opportunity. Peter was very excited, as this was a rare opportunity and could help his company surpass its larger competitors. However, as Peter conducted the negotiations, he realized something unexpected. Although David was a well-known figure in the industry, the people involved in this negotiation were not the ones Peter thought were decisive. While David was the one who showed up and convinced him of the partnership opportunity, the person who was actually driving all the decisions was Mark, a longtime friend of David's who was behind the scenes, not directly involved in the meetings or negotiations. Mark was a well-connected person in the business world and ran a large hedge fund. Not only did he have a large amount of capital, but he also had the ability to create opportunities for the people he chose. Peter realized that all the decisions in negotiation were not made directly by David, but were influenced by Mark from behind the scenes. Mark had private meetings with industry leaders and used his connections to ensure that important decisions were made in the interest of his group. This explains why, despite Peter's great strategy and great products, his company always struggled against competitors with deeper connections. Peter gradually realized that in the business world, decisions are not only made on the stage, but also in the backyard, where those with connections and power really run the show. As Peter dug deeper, he discovered that big decisions in the industry are not made by the directors or company leaders openly, but are also heavily influenced by those behind the scenes, those with power that is silent but extremely important. The lesson from Peter's story is, the backyard is where everything is decided. In business, the people you see standing on stage may not be the ones who really control everything. Those people may just be the representatives of decisions, while in reality, the real power lies with others, those who are behind the scenes and not on the public stage. This truth may be hard to accept, but it is an important part of the unspoken rules of business. The person who succeeds in business is not always the one who is the best or most capable, but the one who understands that the backroom, the hidden relationships and the power behind the curtain are the ones who really decide the game. Conclusion. In business, every important decision is made by people behind the scenes, people you cannot see but have the ability to change everything. Peter learned that no matter how talented and well-prepared you are, if you do not recognize the truth that the backroom is where everything is decided, you will always be the one behind, even if you do everything right. Those who understand the unspoken rules, those who know how to build and maintain relationships behind the scenes, are the ones who can win the game of business. Unwritten law number 5. A handshake doesn't guarantee anything. In the business world, there's a saying that many people have heard. A handshake is enough. However, in the business world, this handshake is not always a guarantee of success. On the contrary, sometimes it is just an empty gesture, a promise without reality behind it and not protected by a clear contract or system. And the story of James, a young entrepreneur in London, is a clear demonstration of the fact that a handshake does not always bring success, but can be a dangerous trap. The story of James and the failed handshake. James is a young and enthusiastic person with a breakthrough startup idea in the technology industry. He started a software development company specializing in providing technology solutions for small and medium-sized businesses. James's company had attracted the attention of many partners, and he was proud to be able to cooperate with a major strategic partner, Robert, who was already well known in the industry. It all started very smoothly. Robert was an experienced investor, and he proposed a strategic cooperation opportunity to James. They discussed the product, the market, and the potential for growth. Robert promised that he would help James expand his customer base, provide financial resources, and create opportunities for James's company to grow. The two had enthusiastic meetings and signed a verbal cooperation agreement without any formal contract. James, feeling confident and excited, believed that working with Robert would take his company to new heights. But after a while, things began to change. Consequences of lack of contractual protection. Although James initially received support from Robert, when his company encountered financial difficulties and needed additional support from his partner, Robert began to change his attitude. He no longer paid much attention or prioritized James's company. Promises of funding and expanding the relationship were no longer fulfilled as planned. James tried to contact Robert to resolve urgent issues, but received only silence. His strategic partner did not respond as promised. After a while, James realized that in the business world, the lack of clear contracts and protection of rights by legal terms was a serious mistake. Robert was no longer directly involved in James's company, and without a formal contract, no clear rights or responsibilities, James became the weaker party in the cooperation. The truth about handshakes is not a guarantee. James' story clearly shows that in business, handshakes are not always a guarantee of success. Without the protection of a legal contract and clear terms, simple promises and trust become easy to exploit. Robert, although initially agreed to support James, eventually backed out and did not take responsibility when the company faced difficulties. Meanwhile, if there was a clear contract, if James had asked for a guarantee of commitment and responsibility from his partner, he would have had the right to demand the implementation of the agreed terms, avoiding such situations. A lesson in being cautious in cooperation. The lesson from James' story is, a handshake is not a substitute for a legal contract. In business, everything must be protected by formal and legal agreements. While a handshake can create trust, without clear terms, your interests can be overlooked when your partner is no longer accountable. This is an important lesson for those starting out in business. Trusting your partner in a handshake can be a good start, but protecting your interests through a contract is essential to avoid being cheated or put in a weak position. Conclusion. In the business world, no one can live on promises alone. You need to protect yourself with contracts, clear agreements, and legal terms. A handshake can be a good start, but a contract is what keeps you safe in the marketplace. Failure to protect your interests can lead to unfortunate failures, as James did. Remember, in business, it is paramount to be careful and cautious in establishing relationships and protecting your interests. Never let the trust in a handshake become a double-edged sword in the hands of others. Unwritten rule number 6. Even close friends need to sign contracts. In the business world, one of the biggest mistakes many people make is putting too much trust in close relationships, especially family. They often think that because they are close friends, everything will go smoothly and everything will be resolved without the need for clear contracts or binding terms. However, the truth is that family relationships in business cannot replace a solid system of contracts and clear commitments. And the story of David, a businessman in Manchester, is a clear example of the failure of a lack of clarity in commitments and cooperation agreements with relatives. David's story, family trust and a bitter end. David, a young businessman in Manchester, started his business with a technology retail store. After a period of development, his store became quite prominent in the area, with a stable customer base and steady growth in revenue. However, when the store began to face financial difficulties and needed to expand to stay competitive, David decided to cooperate with his brother John, who had many years of experience in the investment field. Initially, the two brothers had very open discussions about store expansion, profit sharing, and joint commitments. David believed in the close relationship between him and John, so they did not sign any contracts. All agreements were made through conversations and handshakes between the two. Both thought that, since they were family, everything would go smoothly, and there was no need for legal agreements. However, things did not go as they expected. When the store expansion project encountered some financial and management problems, David began to notice a change in John's attitude. His brother began to withdraw, no longer participating in important meetings, and even did not provide financial support as promised. When David dug deeper, he discovered that John had used part of the initial capital to invest in another project without informing him. The consequences of a lack of clarity in commitment. The matter became more complicated when David realized that John had begun to apply terms and principles that were not in the original agreement, completely changing the profit-sharing structure and control of the store. The relationship between the two brothers gradually became tense, And when David requested a meeting to resolve the issue, John refused and only sent an email notification of his decision. When the problem became serious, David tried to seek help from legal experts, but by then it was too late. The partnership between the two brothers was not protected by a clear contract, and David had no right to request protection for his rights. Lesson from David's story. David's story is a prime example of the dangers of not having a clear commitment, especially when family relationships are considered trustworthy enough. Although David and John had a very close relationship, due to lack of a formal contract and protective clauses, they fell into disagreement and eventually failed in their business cooperation. David lost not only financial support, but also family relationships, causing his company to face serious difficulties. When is family relationship not enough? In business, no matter how much you trust your relatives, you cannot do without the protection of contracts and legal terms. Family relationships cannot replace clear commitments in business cooperation. David never thought he would fall into such a situation, but this shortcoming cost him dearly. The lesson is, in any business relationship, whether it's family or friends, you need a clear contract and legal terms to protect your interests. Without legal protection, you can be taken advantage of without even knowing it. Never let blind trust in a handshake or a family relationship take away your initiative and your own interests. Conclusion. David's story shows that trust in relatives is an important part of life, but when it is not protected by legal commitments, you can pay a high price. To avoid similar failures, you need to understand that in the business world, family relationships cannot replace contract and clarity in commitments. The protection of contracts is what helps you maintain security and interest in any business relationship. 4. Emotional traps in the market. The market is a place where people fight not only with talent and strategy, but also with emotions. No matter how smart you are, if you cannot control your emotions, you can easily be led into wrong decisions. In many cases, greed, impatience, and the desire to succeed can be emotional traps that make you lose your mind and make decisions that cost you dearly. And the story of James, a young investor in London, is a typical example of how emotions can make a person fall into these traps. James's story lost everything because of believing in easy opportunities. James, 29 years old, is a new investor in the stock market in London. He started to have small successes in investing in stocks and cryptocurrencies, feeling that he had grasped the key to wealth. During an investment seminar, James met Mark, a veteran investor in the industry. Mark invited James to participate in an attractive new investment opportunity, which Mark said was an easy opportunity with big profits in a short time. With the desire to prove himself and the desire to have great success like famous investors, James could not refuse. Mark said that this was an opportunity not to be missed, and with just a moderate investment, in a few months, James could triple his profits. This promise made James feel that he could quickly achieve financial freedom. However, when James transferred a large amount of money to the investment project that Mark had convinced him to invest, he only received promises without any clear information about the actual project. Realizing that he had been scammed, James tried to contact Mark, but could not find him. All that was left were some vague documents and a lost sum of money. Analysis. Why did James get scammed? James was not inexperienced or unintelligent. He was a hungry and determined person. However, his impatience and desire for quick success prevented him from being sober enough to thoroughly examine what he was doing. Here are the factors that led James to fall into this emotional trap. Greed and desire for quick success. James wanted to prove that he could be successful and make money quickly, just like the people he admired in the investment world. This desire prevented him from thinking carefully about the potential risks. Blind belief in easy opportunities. Mark knew how to make an opportunity seem so attractive that James felt he couldn't miss it. When an opportunity is promised to be easy and risk-free, it's easy to get caught up in it and forget the need to do your due diligence. Feeling pressure to catch up with others, James wanted to prove that he could also succeed quickly, which made him unable to see that this was just a trap. Lack of checking and research. A key factor that led to James being fooled was that he did not do enough research and checking the information. James only saw the immediate benefits without fully evaluating the potential factors in this opportunity. Lesson from James's story. James' story teaches us an important lesson. Don't let emotions rule your financial decisions. In business, greed and the desire for quick success can lead you into bad decisions. Easy opportunities are not always as good as they seem. Here are some lessons from James's story. Do your due diligence before investing. Before making any investment decision, make sure you have thoroughly researched the project, the people behind it, and the factors involved. Don't let emotions and attractive promises lead you into unwise decisions. Invest only when you understand. Investing in things you don't understand is a quick way to fail. You need to understand the market, the projects, and the risks before investing your money. Control your emotions. Don't let emotions like greed or the desire for quick success dominate the game. Investing is a long-term process. Don't expect immediate results. Patience and a clear strategy will help you get through difficult times. Choose your partners carefully. Choosing your investment partners is equally important. Before cooperating with someone, carefully check them and the projects they are involved in. Don't be fooled by beautiful promises without clear foundation. Conclusion: James' story is not only a warning against blind investment, but also a reminder of the importance of controlling your emotions and knowing what you are doing. The market is not an easy place to achieve quick success. Hasty, thoughtless decisions can lead to irreparable losses. Always remember that sustainable success in business comes from understanding and controlling emotions, accurately assessing opportunities, and carefully choosing partners. Only then can you avoid emotional traps and develop a long-term and sustainable career. V. The importance of knowing when to stop. In business, it is not the person who goes the furthest who wins. It is more important to know when to stop and when it is the right time to retreat. Stopping at the right time can be the biggest victory you can achieve in your career. Sometimes, continuing to invest or expand too much can lead to bigger failures than you can imagine. The story of James, a business owner in London, is a perfect example of the importance of knowing when to stop and avoiding mistakes due to greed. James's story: when greed leads to failure. James, 42, is the owner of a chain of sports retail stores in London. Initially, when the market was still growing, James was very successful thanks to the strategy of expanding stores and reaching many customers. Each store was profitable, and he felt proud of what he had built. However, as sales began to grow rapidly, James could not stop. He decided to open more stores in different cities, including Manchester and Birmingham, hoping that the expansion would help him double his profits. He took out a large bank loan to invest in these new stores. Initially, the expansion seemed to be on track as customers flocked to the store, but after a few months, James began to notice signs of decline in sales. The cost of managing so many stores, including rent, staff, and operating costs, made it impossible for him to maintain the same profits as before. When the new stores in the outlying cities began to lose money, James did not stop. He tried to prolong the time, hoping that the situation would improve and that his investment would be worth it. However, in the end, he could not save the situation. Large loans and unpaid debts became a burden, and he was forced to close some stores and cut staff. Analysis: why did James not stop in time? James is a visionary, decisive, and ambitious person. However, it was his greed and not knowing when to stop that led him into a spiral of debt and failure. Here are some factors that prevented James from escaping the trap of greed. Ambition to expand too quickly. When he saw his success in some stores, James wanted to quickly replicate the model. However, expanding too quickly without careful preparation of finances and operating plans can cause things to get out of control. Subjective state: James was too confident in his abilities. He believed that, with his experience and old strategies, everything would continue to go smoothly. However, the market is not always predictable, and sometimes continuing a strategy without considering new factors can lead to failure. Not stopping at the right time, James did not realize when to exit. Even though the new stores did not bring in the expected profits, he continued to invest in unprofitable projects. Sometimes, knowing when to stop is a deciding factor in the survival of a business. Being too greedy and hoping for big profits, James could not accept small failures and always hoped that a new project would bring bigger results. This made him not accept the fact that, sometimes, it is a smarter strategy to exit when seeing signs of instability. Lessons from James' story. James' story teaches us an important lesson about patience and knowing when to stop. Here are some lessons from his mistakes. Don't chase short-term profits. Sometimes, the rush to expand can cause you to ignore important factors, such as service quality, cost control, and long-term planning. Make sure you understand the potential and risks before deciding to expand. Have a detailed plan and control your finances. Although you may find success in the early stages, to maintain stability, you need a clear financial plan and the ability to reassess your strategy when necessary. Know when to exit. James did not stop when necessary. Sometimes, exiting at the right time is a strategic decision that helps you protect your assets and maintain your position. Knowing when to stop is an important part of maintaining sustainability in business. Don't be too greedy. Ambition is a necessary element in business, but greed can lead you astray. Remember, expanding or growing fast is not always the right choice. Conclusion: James' story is a clear example of knowing when to stop is the biggest victory in business. Although you may be successful in the short term, if you don't know how to control your greed and don't know when to retreat, you will easily fall into failure. In business, success comes not only from perseverance, but also from the ability to perceive and make the right decision at the right time. 6. Theory and practice. The good are not the best, but the one who knows when to quit. Business is not a competition about who works the hardest. Not everyone can achieve success by trying too hard. In fact, winning in business comes from knowing when to stop, when to pause a strategy, or when to quit when there is no more opportunity to continue. This is one of the most important principles of successful strategies. And the winners are not the best, but the ones who know when to quit. Tom's story, learning from failure. Tom, a young entrepreneur in London, is a typical example of this rule. At just 32 years old, Tom founded a startup company that provides software to help small businesses automate their workflows. In the early years, Tom's company grew rapidly thanks to its innovative products and the growing demand in the technology industry. With the initial success, Tom decided to accelerate the expansion of the company, upgrade the products, and increase the scale of operations. He spent heavily on marketing strategies, recruited staff, and implemented many new projects. However, after a while, the revenue indicators began to decline. Although the company maintained its market share, profits gradually decreased. At this time, Tom did not realize that his company was running too fast without controlling the scale. He began to pour more capital into new projects, not taking into account the changes in the market and not identifying potential risks. And when faced with a serious shortage of cash flow, Tom began to realize that continuing to expand while the market was changing rapidly would not bring positive results. Analysis. Why is exiting at the right time important? Understand the timing of the shift. Market changes can be very fast and unexpected. Tom did not see the warning signs from small fluctuations in the software industry. To win in business, you need to be sensitive to changes and be ready to adjust your strategy. The important thing is not to stay in the original direction, but to know when to stop and change direction. Know when to preserve capital and not add more money. Tom did not know when to exit. When the company was in financial trouble, instead of looking for ways to reduce costs or suspend some projects that were not effective, he poured more capital into the company to prolong its life. This made the situation worse. Exiting at the right time is a strategy that helps you retain assets and maintain your spirit to start over. Work smart, not hard. In business, working harder doesn't always lead to success. Tom worked hard, but his lack of control over his strategy and the market led to his failure. Winning comes from working smart. Know when to pull back, take a break, and adjust your strategy. In many cases, it's more important to stop when you're ready than to keep pushing forward with an unprofitable project. Lesson from Tom's story. Tom's story teaches us many lessons about knowing when to quit. Business is not a place for blind persistence. Persistence is important, but it is not always a deciding factor. Knowing when to stop when things are not going well is strategic intelligence. Strategy does not always have to continue. If a strategy is not delivering the expected results, do not cling to it. It is important to know when to stop and change direction. Theory and practice of strategy. A strategy does not always have to continue, even if it has been successful for a period. Always be ready to change and adjust when necessary. Work smarter. Winning in business is not just about the effort and time you put in. It is about working smart, knowing when to change and when to stop. Conclusion. Tom's story shows that winning in business doesn't come from blindly continuing or working too hard, but from knowing when to pull the plug. Winners are those who know when to pivot, when to conserve and protect capital, and when to stop and make room for a new strategy. Working smarter, not harder, is the key to success in today's challenging business environment. 7. Conclusion. The importance of understanding the unspoken laws and how to look at things no one teaches you. In business, one of the factors that determine success or failure is not always knowledge, skills, or hard work. In fact, many people, despite their outstanding abilities and capacities, still face failure simply because they do not understand the unspoken law, principles that are not taught in books, not made public, but are the key to winning in business and finance. We do not fail because of lack of skills, but because we do not understand the basics that others never share. And the most regrettable thing is that these principles do not appear in university lectures, are not in business books, and no one provides us with a clear roadmap to success. Meanwhile, winners in business have clearly understood these unspoken laws, and they apply them skillfully to make the right decisions. James' story. Failure by not understanding the unspoken rules. James, a young British entrepreneur, is a classic example of how ignorance of the unspoken rules can lead to failure despite all the odds in his favor. James started his business with an innovative technology product. He invested a lot of time, effort, and money into developing the product. At first, things seemed to go well. James's product attracted the attention of many in the industry, and he landed several lucrative contracts. However, the initial success did not last long. Although James's product was highly regarded, after a short time, things began to fall apart. James did not understand that behind every major business decision, there are hidden relationships and controls, factors that he was not aware of. By the time James realized this, it was too late. He lost his biggest contract. His main partner backed out without warning, and his company closed after only a year. James failed to understand one important thing. Business is not a fair competition. It is a place where successful people are not only good, but also know how to see the hidden rules that no one taught them. The importance of understanding the unspoken rules. Unspoken rules are not something you can find in contracts or charters. They exist in the decisions you can't see with the naked eye, in the relationships behind the scenes, in the actions that are done quietly and not in public. People who understand the unspoken rules know that skill and effort aren't enough to win in business, but how you read and understand the unspoken rules is what helps you make the best decisions in difficult situations. James lost his opportunity and fortune not because he wasn't good enough, but because he couldn't see the factors that others knew, power, connections, and hidden moves at play. That's why James failed, and that's why understanding the unspoken rules is important in any big game, especially in business. Encourage action. Learn and build a specific strategy. No one is born a financial expert or a good businessman, but you can learn from the failures of others and understand the hidden rules so that you do not make the same mistakes. The first action you can take is to start learning, not only from those who have succeeded, but also from those who have failed, and find out the real reasons why they failed. Understanding and applying the hidden rules in business and personal finance is a first step to achieving financial freedom and long-term success. Learn to see the hidden power in every situation. Develop a clear personal financial strategy with a reasonable spending, saving, and investing plan. Don't be fooled by easy promises. Always consider every opportunity. Carefully evaluate all benefits before making a decision. James didn't understand these things, but you can. You can learn from the mistakes of others so that you don't repeat them. And from there, build a solid foundation for yourself to succeed in the business world. Conclusion. Step out of your comfort zone and learn to read the unspoken rules. Never let ignorance of the unspoken rules make you make mistakes. Step out of your comfort zone and learn the principles that are not taught in books. The business world is not a place of luck, but a place of understanding and smart strategy. Read and understand what no one says, and build yourself a long-term, solid strategy so that you can stand firm in any situation. Then, You will no longer have to worry about whether you're good enough, but instead whether you understand the unspoken rules enough. Because in the business world, the winner is not the best, but the one who knows when to stop and when to move forward, the one who knows how to read what no one says.